throw you out.
You don't need us to go in the car park, just drop me off.
Yes, I can drop you off at the bit where you drop people off.
Where you
That's
drop
right.
people off.
Well, because I've been up and back a few times with Dee on them recently, haven't I? So. And when you do park, just park right on the other side.
When's the name coming, Mum? Oh, imagine wearing song pieces. Evening. Good day for it, eh? When you got a fucking pound or two. Oi, mate,
Yeah.
don't film that, mate. That's an issue. You can't film it. But excuse me. I fucking haven't even got my... Oi! Oh, you had fun too, you can. Get out of here. I love you, Luke.
Mm-hmm.